So I think maybe we wait like 15 more minutes just to let a couple more people fill in. Okay. So thank you guys for.
Are you the only person from Melt that's here then?
I am, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, just me. Okay, so today we're here. We're going to talk a little bit about business analysts and how we can wear that hat. I'm just curious, how many people here are actually a business analyst at the moment, dedicated?
How do you define it?
Okay, give me 3 slides. At the end. Yeah, that's a great question though. I find that what we're really doing most of the time, depending on what role we have, we're actually wearing that hat more than being a dedicated individual. So how many people here manage requirements in some capacity? Awesome. Okay, that's fun. Cool. Okay. So I'm Amory. I come from Melt Media. It's an agency in Tempe, Arizona, so a little ways away. Not as wet. The heat, everybody's like, oh, you have a dry heat, and I never knew what that meant. And I got off the plane yesterday and was like, oh.
This is not that. This is not that. Yeah.
Houston's worse.
And we're not into
Houston's
August yet.
worse. Yeah. So I'll be excited to go back home to my 100 degrees of zero humidity. But I run the business analyst team at Melt Media, and it's a pretty cool group. And we've got a great marketing team that sent me with a bunch of swag. And I think most of us only come to these events for the swag. So come grab some afterwards, because I actually don't want to take this back on the plane. So there's lots of stuff for you. Okay, so for anybody, I hope that you'll pay attention to me and not all my slides. I'm not a designer. These slides are going to be like, all right. But the great news is it's online. So pay attention to what I'm saying, and then you can go grab these afterwards. If you want to write this down now, you can. Otherwise, I have it at the end of the deck. So maybe listen to me and see if it's even worth writing down, and then I'll share it with you again. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to tell you what a business analyst is as defined. Thank you for getting there early. And then we'll talk about pretty much what they do, why they do it, and obviously the big one is how. So let's talk through tools and stuff like that. So to jump right in, what is a business analyst, or a BA? And they're essentially a liaison. And so they're working with 2 different stakeholders, or 2 different teams, and they're kind of translating in between. They're bridging that gap. So on one hand, you have the person that's asking you to do something, whether that's an internal client, an external client, some kind of stakeholder, and you're taking that information and you're giving it to the delivery team that's going to actually put it together. And so you're really responsible for understanding not just what they're asking, but why they're asking. And then taking all that information that you have and kind of handing it off to people that can actually do something with it. So what do we do? What do BAs do? So again, we're going to talk through this as if it's a Drupal project, because obviously we're here at Drupal camp. But let's talk through it as both this is an internal or an external, because I don't know everybody here. I don't know what all you guys do or how you're interacting. So essentially, a client comes to you, a stakeholder comes to you, and they have an idea. They want to migrate their site, they want to build a new site, they want to redesign, whatever it is, they have this idea, and you move into this business phase. And during the business phase, that might be an RFP or whatever it is, we're setting up a project and we're defining what it is that we're actually going to do. And so at that point, you should have your BA hat on, and you should be strategizing with your client or your stakeholder and understanding what it is they're actually asking you to do. And then from there, you move into more logistics. We'll start working with project management. We're actually building up a team that's going to deliver this. We're working on what the resources are going to be, what it is that we're actually building, the requirements around that. And then once we have a pretty solid foundation of what our requirements are going to be like, we'll move into a design phase. And so now we're working with our UX designers, we're working with our visual designers, and we're not only talking about what we're building and why, but now we're talking about more how and what it's going to look like and how it's going to function. And so at this point, we're a UX advocate, but we're also, again, representing the client and the stakeholder. And so now, assuming that we have all of our requirements defined, we have all of our designs put together, we've reviewed them, we know how it's going to function, then we'll take the time to actually move into development. At this point, if you're a developer, you'll be wearing your BA hat. If you're not a developer, then you'll be wearing the BA hat and supporting the client remotely, essentially. And so as the developers are going through, they're asking questions. versus having a project manager and account manager keep going back to the client and say, hey, what about this? Or, what's going on with that? You can actually just say, hey, I know that because I've already had the conversation with the client. I remember that. Let me add that to the documentation or to the tool or to whatever it is. Let me speak on behalf of the client with you. And that obviously avoids a lot of roadblocks, and we'll talk a little bit more about why it's valuable here in a minute. And then there's quality assurance. So at Melt, we actually do QA in-house and onshore. Sometimes maybe that's not the case, depending on the project or your project structure. And so in that case, maybe you're just doing a quick UAT or quick smoke test to make sure that your devs actually built what they said they were going to. Or maybe you're actually working side by side with a client to walk through UAT for them. Again, you're a liaison between both sides. So you're representing not only the client throughout the project process, but also your project team when you're talking with your client.
UAT?
UAT is user acceptance testing. And so you can also, part of the requirements definition, what I typically tend to do is include a user acceptance criteria, which helps with that process. So I want a button, I want to be able to click that button. When I click that button, this is what I expect to happen. And so your UAT is going to go through and actually be testing that and saying, I clicked the button and it did what I thought it was going to. Okay. That's a lot of information. So now we know that a BA is a liaison, that they take information from talking with a client and they bring it into a product delivery team and work across all the disciplines. But how? How are we actually doing that? Unfortunately, there's not a set process. My biggest lessons learned that I can share with you is don't templatize your requirements. Don't say, I'm going to write a BRD for every single project because that's what I'm supposed to do. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for your projects. It doesn't work for your project teams. And what ends up happening is inevitably you end up with more technical projects that end up building this. I think I had a 94-page document one time, and I wondered, Debs, why aren't you reading my document? Well, because I don't know what to read. It's so confusing. So BRDs should be reserved for high-level beginning of the project. This should be the what and the why. What are we building, and why is the client asking us to build it? Right? So any kind of technical information when you start getting into this is how it's supposed to function, that really should be outside of this document. So I'll do a BRD at the top of a project, and it's more of a tactical brief. It's going to talk through what we're actually building, why we're building it, and this is more client-facing and really easily digested. So this could be a couple pages, or it could be, 10.
In our organization, we have a deliverable called Project Charter. It sounds like that might map a little more closely to, it's the what and the why, but not the how.
Yeah, I've heard people call it tactical briefs. I've heard people call it BRDs. There's some other RD.
FRD, feature requirements?
Feature requirements, and I always thought that was functional requirements. Yeah, it is feature. Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah, so we love our acronyms. So I typically couple my BRD with a TRD or some kind of functional specs. And this will typically be what your devs will come into. And this is what your devs will come look at. This is more dev-centric, but if your BRD is the what and the why, your TRD is the how. How is it going to act? How is it going to function? How are we going to build this? You'll have if it's a really complex piece or there's integrations, you'll have your tech stacks in here, you'll have your modules, you'll have your integrations with Salesforce or whoever else it is, right? And so these documents are really helpful for aligning with your development and maybe your quality assurance team if you have one of those, and less so about the client. I find that the client doesn't always need to know, you're going to download paragraphs and you're going to use that? Okay, that makes sense. It doesn't. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about client engagement with these documents in a minute. Then there's do you have a question?
Yeah, so so you're saying that as a BA, you're building the technical requirements as well?
I am, yes.
Okay. And is that something that is specific to you guys? Because I'm in an organization right now where we have somebody whose official title is BA, and I'm a solution architect.
Yeah. And
so there have been discussions about where does the BA in the solution architect begin, and I'm just curious if you guys have, I mean, are you expecting a VA to be able to build those, or do you work alongside people who do that?
So that's a great question. So a little bit of history, or a little bit of information about my company, which is, I think, unique in that we don't have solutions architects. So as a BA, I'm considered a senior BA because I run the team. I'm a technical BA, so I don't want to get too much into the different types of BAs, but so I can, in fact, wear a solutions architect hat, and I oftentimes do. So I'll build out these build specs. I do a lot. I'm a little bit more ingrained with Drupal than I think a lot of my other VAs are. So in the instances where it's somebody not me, or not a senior technical project manager or BA, they would definitely leverage a more technical resource, whether that's a senior developer or if it's a senior BA, or in the event that you have one, a solutions architect.
But is it still the responsibility of that VA, whether technical or not, to actually produce these deliverables for the multiple disciplines?
It is. So if you're looking at a RACI matrix, the BA is now accountable. They're responsible and accountable for delivering this. So as a BA, if I don't know the information, then I would go out to my solutions architect or my technical lead and say, this is the information that I need, help me fill it in. So, and even though I am considered a technical lead, that I still do that because there's some pieces that are just outside of my wheelhouse. So it just takes a little bit of collaboration, but it's helpful to be able to go to that person that you're looking to help solve that problem and have the understanding what the client's asking for and the deliverable. That helps. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of ties into this piece, this build spec. Working in Drupal, it's interesting because there's a lot of different hats, and I find the people that I'm working with and the people that I'm connecting with in these kind of these conventions and camps, that they typically wear multiple hats. So we actually have dedicated site builders at Melt Media. We're lucky. We're very fortunate. So I, as BA or as a solutions architect, can build out a code spec and actually hand it off to an individual and have them build it for me. And so they literally hop into my Drupal instance and start building stuff out without me having to do it, which is kind of cool. But that requires this is really clearly defined. What I like about using this build spec is that it helps things get organized, and then it's easy for me to go to my site builder and say, here are all the things that you need to build now in this order, in order to then have entity references and things later on. So that way it just makes the build a little bit more efficient. Yes, I think, go ahead.
Just wondering if you've used this kind of document with different people, like many different people, and if it works for everybody, or if there's certain people you just cannot seem to get into the spreadsheet kind of.
That's a great question. So she's asking if anybody else has, if this works for everybody. And I talk a little bit about that as far as when I talk about client engagement or team engagement. It doesn't. It just doesn't. Some of my devs totally get it, and some of my site builders look at me like, what? I actually had training sessions to be able to walk through site builders to explain what this stuff actually is. And it started not even looking at this document, but actually just looking through, like, how do I identify what a taxonomy is, or what do I need to do in order to identify collection or field collection versus a content type, and all sorts of stuff. So it takes a little bit of training for some, but I typically reserve this for maybe more technical pieces or more complex. So, and in those cases, the people that I'm working with have a little bit more familiarity with it. And you had a question, yes?
Yeah, do you find certain levels of developer who don't want to be told what to do at this level of detail? Or like, this is what I trained for, is to be able to solve these kinds of problems? Or is it mostly, does this allow you to hire more entry-level Drupal developers because you are spelling everything out so specifically?
Both. So that's a terrible answer, but both. So for us locally, or excuse me, internally at my team, it is helpful to be able to leverage maybe more entry-level folks and get them to the place that we want by bringing them on and working through things like this. Melt is all about mentoring, so that's something that I think everybody there is really keen on doing. So it is helpful, and it's also helpful to, even outside of developers like a site builder, having that ability to come in here and do this. But a lot of the companies that I am familiar with and other agencies locally in Arizona, so I won't speak to what's going on here in Texas, but locally in Arizona, that is the case, where the developer is actually the one responsible for putting this together. They're wearing the solutions architect hat, they're wearing the BA hat, and so it's up to them. Do I need to organize my information this way in order to do it or not? John?
So unlike Amory, where I have a more technical background, I do project management, BA type stuff. And for the type of developers that you are referring to, where it's just like, I don't like you to tell me what to do at all. Usually the way that I try to phrase it or put it is basically, they need something like this. This is the way that I would do it because I know this will work. If you have another way that will do this, then that's great. But this is the idea. Does this get the idea across to you? Okay, well, make the idea work. I don't necessarily care how you do it, but we know this will probably work.
Go ahead.
I also use this spreadsheet, and I got some pushback from the oldest developers on the team. But after using it a while, it's very easy to change things in a Google Doc versus once you build it in Drupal. So this actually gives them kind of a better tool to start and thinking about it in a different way. Putting in comments and, do we need a byline or is it published automatically? Things that they aren't necessarily thinking about.
Okay, so you definitely, it sounds like, take advantage of the collaboration
Yes.
features at this level of detail too.
Yeah. And all of the requirements, all these tools that I'm talking through, the previous two examples here, the TRD and the BRD, these are GDocs. And again, it's the same thing. It's all collaboration. I'm not, just because I'm wearing the BA hat, just because I'm the one that's accountable or responsible for putting this together, doesn't mean that I'm the one that has to actually define everything. So I could say to my team, hey, I think that we should use paragraphs to build out this better, admin interface, and they can come back and say, actually, I think we should use React and we should build out a totally custom admin UI. And in which case, then I update the documents, right? We have a discussion, we update. And I think you had a question?
Yeah, do you have like a set of definitions for, this is what a taxonomy is, this is what an et cetera is for the, site builders?
Yeah, we actually have a training deck put together. I usually go through, it's about an hour. And that's really, that deck is just about, is this document here, is actually explaining what all these things are, getting them introduced to Drupal, and then breaking down why I would put something here. Taxonomies aren't searchable, or the little nuances to help them understand. But if you want my card, I can send that to you separately. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And you had a question in the back?
No, I was just going to add on that I'm on a project and you do use something like this, and it is very helpful. We pushed back a little bit at first, but now we realize the usefulness of it.
I tried once and it did not go well with my phone. So.
Yeah.
We were told that this is how it's going to be, so like it or not.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of adapted to it, but the more we've used it, the more we like it.
I'll be honest that when we first took a shot at it, we were still very Drupal newbie, and so we really didn't have the background to even understand what it all was.
Yeah. So again, having a breakdown and understanding what things actually are and what they mean is helpful.
But like in layman's terms, right? You can't be the
totally.
developer docs.
Yeah.
No one's gonna get that.
Yeah. And our site builders are on a dev path. It's like an entry level to the dev team, so they're typically a little bit more technically inclined. So this stuff is exciting for them too. Okay. Any other questions on that piece? That's a lot.
Have you made a Drupal 8 version yet?
Oh, you know what? I think this actually is. We're using this.
I see panels panes.
Oh, maybe not. I might have done a bad screen grab. We do have it for Drupal 8. We do. We're using it for a new client we just kicked off last week, so it hasn't been filled out yet. So that ought to be fun. But again, if you want, I can share that with you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And something else. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, different types of requirements. So a little bit less technical piece is just user stories. I use user stories when I'm trying to get a point across with my clients, when I'm trying to really not talk necessarily the technical details, but just get them engaged in something that's kind of more empathetic. This is a document I actually put together for a client that was kicking back during design phase. And they were saying, well, you guys are putting an emphasis on this map and on this mobile responsiveness that I don't think is relevant. And so we paused the whole timeline. I took time to write this out, to explain to them what user stories even were, how to use them, and then wrote out all these user stories. And I told them the story of a mom who gets called to her daughter's school or to her friends. Her daughter's visiting a friend. It's in a different area that she's not used to. and she has to find an emergency room by her friend's house. And so she's on her phone with her sick daughter in the car trying to find something, and as soon as she pulls up the search functionality, the map is right there. She hits a filter, gets an emergency room, gets directions, and boom, just like that, she's there. So now that changed the story. Now that the client's like, oh, I totally get that. Okay, that makes sense. Let's go ahead and move forward with your direction. Whereas maybe my designers were like, no, this is what we're supposed to do, just period. Having a user story, having a way to kind of to tell what it is that your end users are going to be using and the types of users that will be using it is helpful. Some people don't write documents out like this. They'll do like story cards. There's lots of cool different ways to do this. But the essence is essentially just getting you to kind of personalize your final user and how they're going to be engaging with your product. And then there's JIRA. I like spreadsheets. I don't know if you can tell. I'll throw a few more, maybe send you one with a macro in it. This is a G sheet that I use, again, for collaboration. This is actually imported into JIRA. So what I do is I get the export, I empty it, and then I fill in all this stuff, and we collaborate as a team. We'll do like working sessions or whatever. We'll do whiteboarding sessions, and I'll be writing in this as we go. And the idea is that once we're all final on what it is that we're actually doing and how we're going to structure this project, whether it's waterfall or agile, whether we're using epics or not, and any kind of dependencies or whatnot, then I can just take this, I can upload it right into JIRA, and now I have all my tickets built out.
When you say upload it right into JIRA, please give me more detail. 'Cause I'm copying pasting over here, and you're about to blow my mind.
Yeah, there's an import feature with JIRA.
What?
And literally what you do is you'll see here, if you scroll over a little bit further, it will actually tell you, you can select if it's an epic or a task. And then what I have here is I have this like formatting built in, so that when it plugs in, it has the markup syntax on it already, so that my tickets are all created exactly how you want. So my setup's a little bit different. We have our custom JIRA that we built out. So what you should do is go into JIRA, do an export out of a project, out of a board, and then just empty out all the fields that are in there, and then enter in the stuff that you want and import.
I can go home now. That's all I think.
Okay, done. She knows how to import. We're good. Yeah, but again, the idea here, which we kind of talked on earlier, is that collaboration. And that way, when I have a ticket I'm assigning to somebody, they can say, oh, I remember talking about that. Oh, I already asked all my questions in our working session. I know exactly what I'm going to build. Here are the key points from that conversation to jog my memory. But for the most part, I'm already pretty confident with what I'm doing. But the most obvious and the easiest, and probably my favorite, are I want statements. And if you looked at my tickets here, I have as a blank, I need the ability to blank in order to blank. Want statements or need statements are really easy ways for the client to recognize what it is, bless you, to recognize what it is that you're trying to do. And so we can say, as an audience member attending the session after lunch, I need to bring water because I get thirsty, right? As a Drupal camp organizer, I need to attend more camps in order to understand what I should do to set up my camp to be successful. As a end user, I need to get ready access to a map in order to make sure that I get a place, find a location easily, that type of thing. Okay, so I think I killed that cat. So we talked about what a VA is, and we talked about what they do. We talked about how they do it with their project team. But why is it actually important? Why does that even matter? Why are we here? Why do we care about defining requirements at the beginning of a project or at the beginning of a sprint? And so I find that gifts are the best way to describe things. So asking questions up front keeps us from having to ask questions later. At the beginning of a project, clients expect you to ask questions. That's the point, right? It's like going and getting food, right? You're at a restaurant and you ask, hey, can I have this for lunch? Okay, great. And then the server comes back 10 minutes later and is like, hey, by the way, what did you want? Fries with that? Like, what the hell, man? You didn't put that in 10 minutes ago? Like, right? And that's alarming. Maybe he did, and now the chef is finally making it and not coming back and asking. But at the end of the day, you feel like, man, this guy totally missed the mark and he wasn't listening to me. So channel your inner 5-year-old and ask questions. Why? What's that? Yeah. Okay. So more questions up front. but better answers to the client. So I don't know if any of you have done this or if you've been a part of a project team that's done this, but the client says to you, hey, can you do this? And you say, nope, sorry, Drupal doesn't do that, can't do it, nope. So it's uncomfortable. It's kind of like, you feel like it's like breaking that relationship with the client because you're like, no, I can't do it. But there's better ways of managing that, and by understanding what the client is asking for and understanding their objectives and the why behind what they're asking for, it can help guide this conversation. So maybe you can't do that. A great example is we had a client who had came to us when we were like almost done with dev. We hand over a staging site, and they look at the admin panel of Drupal, and they're like, I can't use this. Can you build me a custom UI? And we're like, well, no. No. But the problem was, it wasn't that they wanted a custom UI, and they actually had a conference due in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks out, so we actually didn't have the time. Even if we could build them something custom, we didn't have the time. And so what we said was, well, hey, look, I know what you're really asking for is something for your content authors, because they're not tech savvy and they're not used to Drupal, to make it a little bit easier for them, but still meet your deadline of being out on September 1st or whatever it was. What we can do is we can add paragraphs, and we can split things up this way, and we can nest things in a certain way that's impactful, that the content author is then able to go in and copy a blog or add stuff in really easily. And what happened with that was they came back and they're like, we didn't know, and that's why you guys are the experts, and we're so glad we asked the question, and we really appreciate that you took the time to understand what it was that we're trying to accomplish and help us get there, versus listening to whatever it was that we were asking. So it's just a little bit more reasonable answers. Was there a question? I talked past it. And client sign off. The whole reason we put requirements together is to get somebody to sign off. We don't want scope creep. We don't. It sucks. I had a project, I built a mobile application as a project manager that doubled the timeline. It took over a year longer than we expected. I don't even want to tell you how much money it cost, internally and for the client. Just because the client was like, well, I never agreed to that, or, well, I know we talked about that, but I think it should be this. And I didn't have something set in stone to be able to say, on this day, you approved this, and this is what we're going to go forward with. If you want to change it, we'll change it. So just having that alignment and avoiding creepy guys like that is helpful. And then project success. We all feel good when we nailed it, right? When we get something out there and it's like the client is, oh my gosh, this is even better than I expected. This is even better than I envisioned. At Melt, we actually have like launch parties after we launch a site, and we spend time like lessons learned and this and that. And if we totally miss the mark and we mess stuff up and the BA didn't do what they were supposed to and made the dev fail, and like that's an uncomfortable conversation. Even with drinks involved, it just gets nasty. So, typically when we've had a really bad project, it's bad because they'll bring in like macaroons and candy and sweets and no alcohol. This is going to be a bad session. But yeah, so we all like being able to have project success. And the reason that's important is because when you nail it for the client, they come back. So Melt is 17 years old, and we've had a client for over 14 years. So that's a pretty big deal. And so far this year, as of writing this deck, I think we had a total of 63 projects that we've had that are return customers from last year. So, hey, update my site or do this or whatever. So nailing it, having client satisfaction leads to better business, more revenue, and less time in the sales pipeline for repeat or for other projects. Okay, I'm tired of talking. I can only imagine you guys are tired of listening. Okay, so I talked about what a BA is. They're this like liaison, this bridging the gap between project teams. I told you what they do with all the different project teams and how they're putting information out to the teams, why it's even impactful. But I think you're all here to understand how, right? How can I do this better? So let's talk about that. For me personally, and this is maybe a biased opinion, because I'm not a VA by trade, I think anybody can do it. And I think it's pretty straightforward. I know there's varying levels of business analysts and people wearing these requirements hats, but I really do think that there's a few key things that you can do to be successful. So let me tell you about that. These are my golden rules. Take them or leave them. But I think that people will tell you need to have a laundry list of skills, you need to have a certain degree. I'm a sustainable economics major. That's what my degree was. Totally relevant to Drupal and building websites. But I can listen, and I can ask questions, and I can take what I hear and the information that I've gathered, and I can send it off to somebody else where it makes sense to them. So that's really the key piece. So let's listen. You want to get the client to talk. The more they talk, the more information you can collect, and the more information you can collect, the better you can glean requirements. I'm a people person. I like talking, as you can tell. People will tell you that about me. I always happy to strike up a conversation. Not everybody's that way. So sometimes people don't want to go to a client and sit in their office and talk with them, or schedule online sessions and talk through that. The good news is you don't have to. You can send them questionnaires. You can do online forms and surveys. You can use Google Forms for that. You can just have regular stakeholder interviews over the phone, or you can get really creative, write questions, and have somebody else do the stakeholder interviews for you. But there's just lots of ways to get clients to start talking, and the idea is just really to solicit as much information from them as you possibly can. But it's not just getting them to talk, but it's also getting them to talk about what they do. So one thing that some people do is actually observe, depending on what it is that you're doing. So if maybe we're building a mobile app or something crazy, and you want to see how somebody's actually interacting with what they currently have, go watch them do it. Listen to them. Set up user testing. Go to usertesting.com, set it up, watch how they interact with the thing. Hear what they're saying as they're going through it. Or just listen to them talk about it. At the beginning of the day, I have to log into 4 different systems in order to get to this Drupal thing, or whatever it is. It's going to help you understand what their pain points are, where they're struggling. You'll start to hear trends as you're talking to different people. And it gives you the opportunity, it helps you identify opportunities and hear how people solve problems, which is going to make a big difference in how you're drafting solutions, but also how you're explaining them, right? So if you're going to present a solution and you've listened to how the person troubleshoots, then you can go in and say, okay, I'm gonna say this to that person in a way that's going to make sense to them based off of the language that they're talking through. Or I'm going to talk to the key points of the issues that they're having to make sure that I'm really bringing this home. Okay, so you listen, but the problem is that people don't always know what to tell you. They'll tell you what they think you should know. Sometimes they'll tell you what they think you should know, which isn't actually what you should know or what you care about, and they leave off some really important pieces. So not only listening, but actually inquiring and getting people to talk and ask questions is a little bit helpful as well. So I like the 5 whys. I imagine talking with somebody and understanding their problem is like an onion, and just peeling back these layers and getting to the bulb or getting to the root of the problem. I think this is helpful for a number of reasons, but let me talk to you about an example. So this is a real case example. Hey, I have this Drupal site. I want to have a call out on the front page. Okay, that's great. Why? I can say Drupal can do it. Sure, I'll build a call out. I'll put a little CTA on the front. Okay, next. Or I can say, well, why? Why on this page? And the client will say something like, we're building out all this content. I want people to get to it. Well, why? Well, because when I put these newsletters together, people sign up for them. They come to our events. Okay, so you want people to come to your events. Why is coming to your event important? Well, because it turns out we actually have people that when they come to our event, it turns into billable work. And so there's there's a word I'm trying to use here.
Conversion.
Thank you. Conversion, that's the word. So it's conversion rates. You're not asking me for a call out. You're asking me to help you improve your conversion rates, right? Now I can take that information back to my UX team and say, hey, on the events page, there's a direction here where if we include this call out, if we draw more attention to this call out, or instead of just putting a call out, maybe we have a little calendar and some information about the events, and that's really what you're signing up for. It's not just a newsletter, learn about all of our events that are coming up type of thing. And so now we're not just dealing with what the client told us to do, we're developing a better UX and a better experience and a better solution because we asked, because we understood the why. But why is important, but how is also important. So why, okay, you want somebody to convert, but how? How do you want them to engage in this? Do you want them to be able to click on a calendar and sign up for events? Do you want them to be able to add that to their iPhone? Do you want them to be able to add that to their Google? Being able to ask questions around how you expect somebody to engage with this final product, how you expect them to to leverage? Is this a product that they're going to in turn give to somebody else or sell? Is it going to be a SaaS thing? There's all sorts of reasons why you would ask the how, and that's also going to help you understand the requirements that you're defining and how you're translating what's necessary to translate to your project team or your delivery team. And really, it gives you a lot more information than you would get by just asking about the why. And then taking that. So now I know what my stakeholder is going through, what they're actually asking me, and why they're asking me, how they're expecting things to work. But how do I take that information and translate it to my team? So you asked earlier, my project teams aren't the same. I have some really technical projects that are great. I have some really non-technical projects that are fun. My teams are all different. The people I'm engaging with are different. The tools and the requirements documents that I'm building for those individuals are going to be different based off that project team. If I'm dealing with a particular industry, maybe I have a healthcare client and the team that I'm working with isn't familiar with that healthcare or isn't familiar with that jargon or those acronyms. It's up to me to, one, understand those, and two, help translate that so my team knows what it is that the client's actually talking about. So that's just taking time. One thing that I've actually done is I'll take 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of a kickoff or the beginning of a work session, and literally walk through definitions. This is what this acronym means. This is what this client is talking about. Can we all get in alignment with what admin panel means, right? And it works both ways. It's not just internally with our project teams, but it's also with our client, right? So maybe our client doesn't know Drupal. Maybe they have no idea what we're talking about when we say taxonomy or content types or nodes. So having that context and taking the time to help bring them up to speed, to be able to understand what it is that we're saying is really impactful and really helpful. So as I say, words matter. There's a running joke in our team. I always say words matter. But knowing your team. So again, as I mentioned, it's not about having a one-size-fits-all, right? Knowing that your team is in fact familiar with healthcare and you don't need to take the time to get them up to speed on jargon. Or maybe you're just bringing one new resource on and you don't need to take the whole team through that process. You can just go talk with that one person, wrap with them individually, and get them to know what we're talking about. But it's also about speaking their language. So if I'm working with a site builder who's new to Drupal, I'll probably use different words than if I'm talking to my senior Drupal guy who's been around the block a few times, right? And there's some kind of intuition there where you kind of just know, I know that he already assumes that we're going to do it this way, so I'm not actually going to say that. And other times I need to be really explicit and say, this is what we're doing, this is the assumption behind why we're doing that, and etc. That being explicit is also really helpful for offshore resources. So I've used some offshore resources in the past, which is awesome. And I found that the assumptions that I had made were not the assumptions that they made. So I had to go back, and it took us a couple extra cycles just to be able to be explicit. I assumed that there would be punctuation, that you would know to add punctuation. You literally copy and pasted what I put. So my bad. In the future, I will make sure that I format it properly when I send something to you. But I think the most important thing, we talked about this earlier, is having valuable deliverables for your team. If people don't like your code spec, then don't share that with them. Don't make it for them. It's not going to be valuable for them. And you're just going to waste time building a requirements document or some kind of tool or whatever it is that's not actually valuable for your team. It's not used. And what's the point? Then you just get pissed off. You're like, man, I spent so many hours working on that. So yeah. Okay. So that's a lot. Can everybody repeat word for word what I just said? Okay.
I have a lot of very detailed notes.
Oh, good. Can you share those with me?
I'm not going to type them up. Write them up, though.
I do. I have this deck online. I'll share it out with you, and I have all sorts of notes in there as well, so you can browse through that. But let's just do a quick recap because we like GIFs and they're fun. I think this is a beautiful mind gift. I don't know, but what we do. Okay, so a BA bridges the gap between those two teams. They're talking through what the client needs, what the project team needs, and making sure that both people know what's going on. They are going to ask questions, make sure they have a solid understanding, and they're going to work with all disciplines to make sure that that understanding of the project is translated for everybody on the project team that needs to know. And then, of course, we build valuable deliverables that people actually need and want. Why we do it? Well, client sign-off was a big one. Managing timeline, budget, and scope. Obviously, your PMs are going to love that. Unless you are a PM, then you already do this pretty well. And then just making happy clients. And so happy clients make more clients, and that's always good. So good client satisfaction. And then the how. I just thought this was really exciting. This is the Superman of the...
Superman, Batman.
Yeah, the two versus each other, but Wonder Woman's really good. So I had to add that because I got the song playing in my head now. It's awesome. And the how is the listen. You want to hear what the client is saying, what they're really asking for, solicit additional information to understand it a little bit better, and then take that information and make it put it into a digestible format for your specific project teams. Okay. I know you asked questions along the way. I appreciate it, but does anybody have any other questions in general? Yes.
So a lot of what you talked about in the pre-development phase could seem like possibly open-ended type of work that could have a large impact on the project budget in terms of defining the requirements. It's kind of an agency-ish question, but like we do recharge work inside our organization, and so a big part of our problem up front is how much time do we spend defining requirements before the client has paid us a single dollar? How do we start to get paid for that work? Seeing that work as valuable, and then also helping them get a better sense of what it will actually cost to develop the product. So how do you guys manage that? Do you structure like a discovery engagement up front before you give them a development budget and then agree to move forward? Or
Yeah, that's an awesome question. That's a really good one. So we actually do both. It depends on the size of the project. So if we're doing a pretty standard Drupal build, or we have a site that's coming on, maybe there's a little bit of migration or this, that, and the other, but it's already something that exists, we have a strategist on site, and so that person will typically come into the business development cycle. They'll look through the RFP. They may or may not pull in some kind of senior dev or senior VA. We'll talk through what that actually looks like. And what we like to do, because obviously we want the client to sign, is to give them something, right? And so we'll typically put together some sexy document. It's like, here's a workflow, or here's an example of a user flow, somewhat of a low lift. But typically the people that are doing that aren't the people that are the doers of the organization. They're more the higher level. And so that's really what they're meant to be doing. We're not looking at their utilization rate, so it's okay that they spend a little time doing something that's non-billable. But if somebody's coming in and saying, we want you to build us a brand new Drupal site, and we want to have integrations with this, that, and the other, and here's our Salesforce thing, we'll give you access to that, everything that we have comes from it, then we typically will actually structure a discovery effort beforehand, and that may or may not actually include requirements. We might actually do a discovery effort just to get them a proper scope, and then move into an actual project timeline with requirements definition at that point.
do you work on, in that second type of project, is that scope and the budget for that scope, is that going to be a fixed bid or a time and materials?
We do both. I typically find more fixed bid though. It's a bit easier for us to manage that way. Different agencies, different tactics, but we've done both. We typically do time and materials more for sprints and agile, which seems to work a little bit better. But yeah, good question. Yes.
Speaking of sprints and agile, how does it work for either two? Is it one different than the other? Would you do this technique if you were moving into sort of a waterfall project versus an agile type project?
Yeah. So I think not really. If I'm defining requirements, I'm going to define requirements before dev. And the difference is, if it's waterfall, we're doing all the requirements gathering up front before we actually move into dev. If it's sprint, if it's agile, we're doing sprints, which will typically start, for us, what we do is it's a 0 sprint. And so now the BA is going to actually define requirements for sprint 1 and help set up tickets. We'll get the team on board, and then once we move into sprint 1, the BA is now setting requirements for sprint 2. So we're still doing requirements up front and before development, but we're doing smaller chunks versus when we're doing waterfall, we're doing a big one. But likewise, when we're doing a waterfall, you can't account for everything. You're not going to do it. So the requirements documents that we have put together will typically update as we go. But we'll have one, like a signed off version of saying, client, you approved this at this date, and go from there.
The only thing I would add to that is make sure your client you set a firm date that they can't modify after this date.
Yes.
The project I'm on, we do 3 weeks sprints. First 2 are dev, third week's test. I've completed stories, and the last day of dev, they've come in and changed departments on me.
Yeah.
And I can't push back because I'm just a developer. I just say, okay, yes, and then roll with it.
Do you have a project manager or BA on your team?
I do, but he doesn't like to stand up sometimes. I like him, but he'll stand up. If it's an easy task, I don't mind doing it, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's like completely rework. I'm like, I'll stand up and I'll say no. You know?
Yeah.
We've got to push this to the next sprint.
Yeah. We typically say, so we have like a hard requirements approval. You look at this and you approve it, but it's almost always, and it's actually written into the contract that no changes can be made after we move into dev, and any suggested changes would become a change order thereafter. So there's a little bit more power when you do it that way. Yes, I got him and back. Yes.
So going back to, if you had to bifurcate a BA and solution architect, do you see any sort of clear cut? This is where you might draw the line between what a BA does versus a solution person, or?
Yeah. So if I were to structure my organization to actually have a solutions architect, I would say that a business analyst would probably stop at the what and the why, and they're now responsible for more of the business side of things and understanding the client deliverables and being that advocate. But the how and the the tech stack and everything else that we're doing would be the actual solutions architect with the support of the BA. So some of the tech leads that I've worked with, the documents are not good. They're amazing with the content that they put in it, but I couldn't share that with the client. In which case, they're going to give me all the content, and I'm just going to, beautify it to send it off to the client. So they're still responsible for it, but I can support them.
So as you as a BA, are you also managing client expectations, or are you? Because normally, I think a project managers normally, whipping, cracking the whip and stuff. Is that you, or is there somebody that works alongside you to help?
Yeah, so depending on your agency, it's going to be different, or your project team. I would definitely be a strong advocate for having a project manager. For us in particular, and the way that we manage Drupal projects, it's a combined effort. So when we sit down with the client for the very first time to sign a contract, you have your project manager and your BA. Your project manager is going to run the project, the timeline, budget, scope, a lot of the contractual obligations, and also a little bit of client management. But so the BA is now responsible for managing the project team, managing requirements, defining what's going to actually roll out, and also supporting the client providing client management. That way, when the PM takes off, the client still has some kind of relationship with you. There's no loss, and vice versa. Because we actually like vacations. That's a terrible thing, but it's nice to be able to go on a vacation without your client even really feeling that. So there's a little bit of continuity by leveraging both. But typically, I would say that you have an account manager and/or project manager that are dealing with the client throughout the project, whereas the BA is just kind of is representing the client internally to the project team.
It's a little bit of a conflict of interest in a way, because the project manager really needs to look out for the interests of the agency, and the BA needs to look out for the interests of the client.
Yes, that's a great analysis. And you had a question in the back?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So I was wondering, this is a question for you and anyone really, but there are certain words that work better with clients in writing or verbal communications. So discovery, architecture, solutions, strategy, requirements. Are there certain terms or phrases that you think work better, that make your clients feel better about your engagement?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think this kind of ties into knowing your audience, knowing your team.
Yeah.
So for example, we were approached by somebody who they built this, they had taken 2 years to go through, this huge complex site that I want to build, and here's all the information. And they did this whole requirements phase internally, and they went over to, we'll call it another CMS, which failed epically. And then they came back to us and they're like, hey, we have all this information, we want to set up this thing up on Drupal. I'm like, okay, great. well, we have to go through a requirements phase. Well, no. We've already done a requirements phase. We've got 2 years of it. So now my contract, I call it functional specifications, right? So, yeah.
What do they think about the title of business analyst or business analysis as a concept as opposed to account management or whatever?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the industry. Most people that are familiar with tech or that are in a role that's tech-based are pretty comfortable with it.
Right,
I had a client who it was a legal firm. They had really no expectations or understanding of any kind of website or the roles or the phases or any of that stuff. So that was a little bit of an education piece, which was like, hey, I'm a BA. This is what that means to you. Here's how I'm going to help support you on this project. Or this is our quality assurance team. This is what they're going to do to help support you. This is what quality assurance means, or this is what QA2.
Sounds really reassuring.
Yeah, it does. And we call them quality assurance engineers. They sound really smart.
Right.
Great, thank you for that.
Kind of, you're talking about wording stuff. My client, as a government agency, there was something that they had that there was no Drupal module for it, so we had to write a module for it. We were told not to call it custom code. We had to call it tailored code.
Oh, that's true. I haven't used that one.
It got past because if we called it custom, their security team would basically beat it to death and not kick, would kick it back to us. Since we called it tailored, they still went into it, but didn't kick it back at us.
That's good. That's good to know. I have to write that one down. I just went through. I had a very similar thing where their security office on the client side made me write this like crazy documentation, like classification, data classification, like all this stuff, and that took much longer and was totally out of scope. But what do you do? Okay, so there's the link to the deck.
Oh,
Any other questions?
actually, I did have one.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. I work for the state.
Oh, okay.
So, I'm interested in this solution.
Yeah. What was your question, sir?
It was, have you found, since we seem to be on the verge of a kind of a platform shift with Drupal into decoupled land, a clash between, the business requirements and the technical wish list of your internal development staff? Because I saw a site recently that an agency built, and it was done in React on the front end, GraphQL, wrapped Drupal on the back end, but I didn't see anything in the interface that would justify doing it in React.
Yeah.
And it looked like they just wanted the client to pay for their getting up to speed on the next, kind of evolution of, the Drupal platform, tool set.
Totally.
And I don't know if you've seen that or run into that or.
With our team, not so much. We are we're pretty involved in the community. So I'm glad you asked. I have a React for Better UX talk tomorrow at 1:30. So I'll talk a little bit more about why we would use React for UX. So that's kind of fun. It's my partner called out last minute, was like, hey, can you do this? So that's tomorrow. I think what we found is that because we are involved in the community and because we're taking the time, our company actually gives us time to self-train and self-develop, so we don't run into that as much. But to his point earlier, that's really where it comes into having somebody with some technical expertise to both manage the project and manage the client. So having somebody say, we can do that for cheaper, or we can do that easier, and really driving the developer to make a use case for it helps. Okay. Yes.
I'm not sure exactly how to word this, because I think your group would probably just say, no, we don't want that job. If you had an unreasonable time frame, and I think this is why the spreadsheet didn't work for us, because
timing.
We didn't have enough time to really spend getting everybody on board with it.
Yeah.
And the developers were just like, you only give me a week to do this, and I have to do this now, and I'm not going to review this spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But so I'm wondering, aside from the spreadsheet, if you had to speed things up, what might you do?
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. You're really just asking if you have a client coming in and saying this is a time frame, how do you shorten your project life cycle to meet that timeline? And so we're actually doing this kind of weird, it's really timely, we're doing this blended waterfall agile thing at the moment, where we've started our designs, we've started dev because we're setting up a new Drupal site, and we've started requirements all at the same time. So I'm building out Salesforce mappings and an IA and a site map while my designers are putting together some wireframes and while our Drupal developers are actually building out the beginning of the site with what they can. So that's kind of condensed our timeline, where it would have been like 3 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks for requirements and then another 2 weeks for design and then start dev. This allows us to start just moving stuff out right away, but still have hard requirements and due dates saying this is when the client needs to approve it and move forward. So it depending on your project team, that's an option. But if you have a specific example, take my card, we can rap about it offline. Does that answer your question? So there's just a few minutes left. I'm sure you guys all probably want to jump to the next one, but I do have swag. So if you come take swag, that'd be really helpful.
Could you show the URL for the deck
Sure.
one more time? It went back. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.